in the vast expanse of the Dakota Territory, where the rolling plains met the unforgiving badlands, a chance encounter took place that would forever alter the course of an isolated existence. It wasn't cattle or land that changed hands that frigid December evening in 1879, but 12 souls seeking refuge from a life of servitude, their collective fate hanging by the thread of a stranger's mercy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Blackwood stood on the weathered porch of her isolated ranch house, rifle in hand, watching the horizon with eyes as hard and unforgiving as the land she had claimed as her own. The winter wind howled across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of another brutal season of solitude. Before we continue with this story, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca was a woman whose shadow stretched longer than her 5'8" frame, whose hands bore calluses thicker than leather, and whose heart had been carved hollow by a war that had stolen everything she had ever loved, the once-acclaimed nurse who had mended broken soldiers on blood-soaked battlefields of the Civil War now tended only to her livestock and the ghosts that haunted her dreams. The Willow Creek Ranch sat like an island in a sea of grass, 30 miles from the nearest settlement of Prairie Falls, a testament to one woman's determination to escape the world that had taken her husband, her child, and her faith in humanity. For 7 years, Rebecca had lived alone, speaking more to her horses than to people, finding companionship in silence and purpose in survival. The day that changed everything began like any other. Rebecca rose before dawn, her body moving through chores with the mechanical precision of someone who had reduced life to its essential components. Feed the animals, check the fences, repair what was broken, hunt what was needed. There was comfort in routine, safety and predictability, and she had built her existence around both. As the winter sun began its early descent, painting the sky in watercolor shades of amber and violet, Rebecca noticed a cloud of dust on the horizon. Visitors were rare at Willow Creek Ranch and rarely brought anything but trouble. She retrieved her Winchester rifle from its place beside the door and stepped onto the porch, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The approaching wagon moved with the desperate speed of something being pursued. It bounced and swayed across the uneven terrain, drawn by 2 horses that looked ready to collapse from exhaustion. Behind it, still distant but closing, rode a comro, group of men whose purpose was written in the determined set of their shoulders and the weapons gleaming at their sides. Rebecca's finger rested lightly on the rifle's trigger as the wagon drew closer. She had no interest in other people's troubles, had worked hard to insulate herself from the complications of the world beyond her property lines. But something about the frantic pace of the wagon and the predatory formation of the pursuers stirred memories she had spent years trying to bury. The wagon careened into her yard, the driver pulling back on the reins with such force that the horses reared and whinnied in protest. The vehicle skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust and desperation, and Rebecca found herself staring at a man whose face was streaked with blood and terror. "Please," he gasped, his voice ragged with exhaustion. "They'll kill them. They'll kill them all." Before Rebecca could respond, the side of the wagon was thrown open, revealing its cargo. 12 young women huddled inside, their faces bearing expressions that ranged from terror to defiance. Their clothes were fine but torn, their hands bearing the unmistakable marks of people unaccustomed to hard labor. Some couldn't have been older than 16, while others appeared to be in their early 20s. "What is this?" Rebecca demanded, her rifle still trained on the driver. "Who are these women, and who's chasing you?" The man slid from the wagon seat, his legs nearly buckling beneath him. "My name is Thomas Calloway. I was hired to transport these ladies to Helena as companions for miners and businessmen." But they're not willing companions, they're captives, sold by a man named Victor Blackwood to work in his brother's establishments. Rebecca's grip tightened on her rifle at the mention of the name. Blackwood, you say? Yes, ma'am. Victor Blackwood. He runs a network that stretches from Chicago to San Francisco, dealing in human lives like they're cattle. These women were promised respectable jobs as governesses, seamstresses, and teachers. Instead, they were drugged, transported west, and were to be sold to the highest bidders. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. And you just happened to develop a conscience. In the middle of your delivery? Thomas touched the wound on his forehead. I've done many things I'm not proud of, ma'am. But this, he gestured to the frightened women, this was too much even for me. When I realized what was happening, I changed course. Victor's men have been chasing us for 2 days straight. One of the women stepped forward, her chin raised despite the fear evident in her eyes. My name is Eleanor Hargrove. I was a teacher in Boston before I answered an advertisement for a position in California. Everything this man says is true. Please, we have nowhere else to go, and those men will be here any minute. Rebecca studied the woman. Eleanor stood tall despite her circumstances, her blue eyes direct and unflinching. Her golden hair was tied back in a simple braid, and though her dress was wrinkled and travel-stained, she carried herself with dignity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Those men, Rebecca said carefully. How many are there? 8, Thomas replied. Well armed and without a shred of mercy among them. They're led by a man named Jackson Blackwood, Victor's younger brother. He's the one who runs the houses in Helena. Rebecca's jaw tightened. The Blackwood name was one she knew all too well. Victor Blackwood had been a profiteer during the war, selling supplies to both sides while claiming patriotic motives. His younger brother Jackson had been rumored to be involved in darker business ventures, though nothing had ever been proven against either of them. 7 years ago, it had been Victor Blackwood's company that had supplied the tainted medicine that killed Rebecca's 4-year-old son Samuel during a scarlet fever outbreak. The same outbreak that had weakened her husband James enough that when pneumonia struck the following winter, he had no strength left to fight. The Blackwoods had grown rich while families like hers had been destroyed. The sound of approaching horses broke through her thoughts. Get those women into the house, she ordered, her decision made in an instant. Thomas, can you still handle a gun? The morning dawned crisp and clear over Willow Creek Ranch, the rising sun casting long shadows across the land that had become both sanctuary and battleground. In the 2 weeks since their first confrontation with Jackson Blackwood's men, Rebecca had transformed her solitary homestead into a training ground unlike any the Dakota Territory had ever seen. Again, she commanded, watching as Eleanor reloaded the Winchester with steadily improving speed. Every second counts when your life depends on it. Eleanor nodded, her face set with determination as she worked the lever, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a new round. Her hands, once soft from years of turning book pages and writing on chalkboards, now showed the beginnings of calluses that matched Rebecca's own. Better, Rebecca acknowledged when Eleanor completed the drill. Now hit the targets. The makeshift shooting range stretched along the eastern edge of the property, tin cans and bottles arranged at varying distances. Eleanor raised the rifle to her shoulder, took a breath, and squeezed the trigger with deliberate precision. The can at 50 yards jumped and clattered against the rock behind it. You're a natural, Rebecca observed, genuine approval in her voice. You've got steady hands and good instincts. Eleanor lowered the rifle, a small smile touching her lips. I never imagined I'd be learning to shoot like this. In Boston, my biggest challenge was keeping 30 children quiet during their lessons. Life has a way of changing our expectations, Rebecca replied, her gaze drifting to where the other women were engaged in their own training exercises across the ranch yard. Clara and Sarah were practicing hand-to-hand combat techniques there, movements growing more confident with each session. Mary stood at the barn door, throwing knives at a wooden target with increasingly impressive accuracy. The others were scattered around the property, each developing skills that would have seemed unimaginable to them just weeks before. "They're stronger than they know," Thomas commented, approaching with 2 cups of steaming coffee. "Stronger than the Blackwoods could have ever anticipated." Rebecca accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Necessity builds strength faster than anything else. They understand what's at stake. The stakes had been made abundantly clear after their first encounter with Jackson's men. 3 days after driving off the initial attack, a lone rider had approached the ranch under a flag of truce. He had delivered a message from Victor Blackwood himself: surrender the women or face the consequences. Rebecca's response had been simple and direct. She had returned the messenger with a bullet hole through the brim of his hat and a warning that the next one would be between his eyes. "Victor won't take that insult lightly," Thomas had warned. After the messenger galloped away, "He's not accustomed to being denied." "Good," Rebecca had replied. "I want him angry. Angry men make mistakes." Now, as she watched her unlikely army prepare for the battle they all knew was coming, Rebecca felt a mixture of pride and concern. These women had shown remarkable resilience and determination, but they were still outnumbered and facing an enemy with virtually unlimited resources. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor asked, noting Rebecca's distant expression. "That we need more than just skills to win this fight. We need information." She turned to Thomas. "How long would it take you to reach Prairie Falls and back?" Thomas considered. "If I push hard, a day each way. But the Blackwoods will have men watching the roads." "Not all the roads," Rebecca replied. "There's an old hunting trail that cuts through the eastern ridge. It's barely visible unless you know where to look. You could be in town and back before they realize you've gone." Eleanor looked between them. "What kind of information are you hoping to get?" "The kind that gives us an edge," Rebecca said. "The Blackwoods have been operating their network for years. They've made enemies, left traces, created vulnerabilities. We need to find them." Thomas nodded slowly. "I know a few people in town who might talk, for the right price or the right threat." "Take whatever you need from my supplies," Rebecca told him. "And Thomas, be careful, you're no good to us dead." As Thomas prepared for his journey, Rebecca gathered the women for their daily strategy session. They had converted the ranch house dining room into a war room of sorts, with maps of the surrounding territory pinned to the walls and carefully annotated with defensive positions and potential approaches. "The Blackwoods won't wait forever," Rebecca began, addressing the group. "When they come, they'll come with everything they have. We need to be ready not just to fight, but to win decisively." Clara, who had emerged as something of a tactical prodigy, pointed to the map. "We've fortified the main approaches, but we're still vulnerable from the north ridge. If they get shooters positioned up there, they'll have clear lines of sight to most of our defensive positions." Rebecca nodded. "That's why we're going to change the battlefield. Tomorrow we start digging." The plan that Rebecca outlined was ambitious and ingenious. Rather than simply waiting for the Blackwoods to attack, they would reshape the terrain to channel the attackers into predetermined kill zones, creating a defensive network that would multiply their effective fighting strength. "We'll dig trenches here, here, and here," she explained, marking the map. "Deep enough to provide cover, with firing platforms positioned to create interlocking fields of fire. We'll build false barricades that look like our main defensive line, but are actually designed to draw them into ambush positions." Mary, whose quiet demeanor belied a sharp tactical mind, spoke up. "What about the barn? It's the most vulnerable structure, but also our best high ground." "We're going to make it a trap," Rebecca replied. "They'll expect us to defend it heavily, so we'll make it look minimally guarded. When they move to take it, They'll find themselves caught in a crossfire. From hidden positions, will build into the root cellar and the loft. The women absorbed this information with thoughtful expressions, already thinking through the implications and requirements. They had come so far from the frightened captives who had arrived at Willow Creek Ranch just weeks ago. Each had found strength they hadn't known they possessed, skills they had never imagined developing. Sarah, the youngest, at barely 18, had discovered a talent for reconnaissance, her slight frame and quick movements making her an ideal scout. Clara's fierce temperament had channeled into a gift for tactical planning. Mary's steady hands had made her both a skilled markswoman and drawing on knowledge from helping her physician father, the group's medic. Even the quietest among them, like Judith with her bookkeeper's precision, had found roles that utilized their unique abilities. Judith had created an inventory system for their weapons and supplies that ensured nothing was wasted or misplaced, a seemingly small contribution that might make the difference between victory and defeat in the coming battle. "We have something the Blackwoods don't," Eleanor observed as they concluded their planning session. "They're fighting for profit. We're fighting for our lives and our freedom," Rebecca nodded. "Remember that when the time comes, it's not just about surviving the fight, it's about what comes after. The lives you'll build when this is over." As the women dispersed to begin implementing their new defensive plans, Rebecca found herself momentarily alone in the war room. She studied the map, tracing the contours of the land that had been her solitary refuge for 7 years and was now the center of a conflict she had never sought but couldn't avoid. The sound of a chair scraping across the floor drew her attention. Eleanor had returned, her expression thoughtful. "You never told us your full story," she said, sitting across from Rebecca. "We know bits and pieces, that you were a nurse in the war, that you lost your husband and son, that you have some history with the Blackwoods, but not how all of it connects." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the scar that ran along her left forearm, a souvenir from Antietam. Finally she spoke, her voice low but steady. "I met James Blackwood, no relation to Victor and Jackson, at a field hospital near Chancellorsville. He was a captain in the Union Army, wounded but not seriously. I was one of the nurses assigned." To his ward, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He was a terrible patient, always trying to get back to his men before he was healed. We argued constantly." "And fell in love," Eleanor supplied. Rebecca nodded. "We married after Gettysburg. When the war ended, we came west with our son Samuel. James had inherited some money from his father and bought this land. We were going to build something beautiful here." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. Then came the scarlet fever outbreak of '72. Samuel was 4. The doctor in Prairie Falls prescribed medicine from the Blackwood Supply Company, Victor's operation. What we didn't know was that Victor had been cutting his medicines with cheaper ingredients to increase his profits. The fever took Samuel in 3 days. Eleanor's face showed her horror and sympathy. "And your husband?" "The same outbreak. Weakened James, though he survived it. But when pneumonia came through the following winter, he had no reserves left to fight it." Rebecca's voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the table. "I testified against Victor's company at a hearing in Chicago. The case was dismissed due to insufficient evidence, but the publicity cost him a government contract. He's never forgotten that. So when Jackson showed up here, it wasn't coincidence. The Blackwoods never forget a slight, and they consider me unfinished business." Rebecca's expression hardened. "What they don't realize is that I feel exactly the same way about them." The conversation was interrupted by Sarah bursting into the room, her face flushed with excitement. "Riders approaching from the east," she announced. "But it's not the Blackwoods, it's Thomas, and he's brought company." Rebecca and Eleanor followed Sarah to the porch, where they watched a small group of riders approach. Thomas was in the lead, and behind him came 5 men and 3 women, all armed and riding with the watchful alertness of people accustomed to danger. Who are they? Eleanor asked, her hand instinctively moving to the revolver at her hip. Rebecca squinted against the afternoon sun. Reinforcements, if we're lucky. Complications, if we're not. Thomas reined in his horse at the edge of the yard, raising a hand in greeting. Found some folks in Prairie Falls who have their own reasons to hate the Blackwoods, he called. Thought they might want to join our little rebellion. The leader of the newcomers dismounted with fluid grace, revealing herself to be a tall woman with dark hair streaked with silver and the weathered complexion of someone who lived primarily outdoors. She approached the porch with confident strides, her eyes assessing Rebecca with professional interest. Maggie Hawkins, she introduced herself, extending a hand. I run a freight company out of Prairie Falls, or I did, until the Blackwoods decided they wanted the contract for themselves and burned my wagons. Rebecca clasped the offered hand, finding the grip strong and calloused. Rebecca Blackwood. This is my ranch. Maggie's eyebrow quirked at the shared surname. Any relation to those bastards? None, Rebecca assured her. Just an unfortunate coincidence. Thomas tells me you're preparing to make a stand against Victor and his operation, Maggie continued. Says you've got 12 city women you've turned into fighters, and a plan to take on the biggest criminal enterprise in the territory. That's the essence of it, Rebecca agreed. Maggie grinned, the expression transforming her stern features into something approaching warmth. Sounds like exactly the kind of insanity I can support. My people and I would like to offer our services. As the newcomers were introduced and integrated into the ranch's defensive plans, Rebecca found herself reevaluating their chances. Maggie's group brought not only additional fighters, but also valuable skills and resources. Among them was a former cavalry sergeant named Daniel who had extensive experience with explosives, a skill that opened new possibilities for their defensive strategy. We can create controlled avalanches here and here, he explained, pointing to the map. Force them to approach through this narrow valley where your sharpshooters can pick them off one by one. Another of Maggie's people, a Lakota woman named Swift Deer, brought knowledge of the land that exceeded even Rebecca's. She identified water sources Rebecca hadn't known existed, hunting trails that could serve as escape routes, and natural features that could be incorporated into their defenses. My people fought on this land for generations, Swift Deer explained. We learned to use every rock, every tree, every change in the wind. By evening, the expanded group had developed a comprehensive defensive strategy that utilized their combined knowledge and skills. The mood around the dinner table that night was one of cautious optimism, tempered by their realistic assessment of the challenges they still faced. Victor will bring at least 30 men, Thomas warned as they discussed the latest intelligence. He had gathered in Prairie Falls. Professional gunmen, not just hired thugs. And he's offering a substantial bounty for each of the women returned alive. Let him come, Clara declared, her eyes bright with defiance. We'll show him that we're not merchandise to be bought and sold. Rebecca studied the faces around the table, women who had been victims just weeks ago, now transformed by necessity and determination into warriors. They had each found their own path to strength, their own way of reclaiming the power that had been taken from them. Eleanor caught her eye and smiled, a small, private expression that conveyed a depth of understanding that surprised Rebecca. In another life, another time, they might have been friends, two educated women with similar values and complementary personalities. Even now, in the midst of preparing for battle, Rebecca found herself drawn to Eleanor's quiet confidence and thoughtful insights. As the planning session continued, Rebecca allowed herself a moment to consider what victory might look like. Not just surviving the coming battle, but what would come after. For 7 years, she had existed rather than lived, moving through her days with mechanical precision, finding purpose in survival but no joy in it. These women had changed that. bringing noise and life and possibilities back to Willow Creek Ranch. The thought of returning to solitude after they were gone created an unexpected ache in her chest. "You're thinking too far ahead," Maggie commented quietly, having moved to sit beside Rebecca while the others were engaged in a spirited debate about the best positions for their sharpshooters. "Focus on the fight in front of us. The rest will sort itself out." Rebecca gave her a measured look. "Voice of experience?" "Something like that." Maggie sipped her coffee. "Lost my husband to the Blackwoods too. Different circumstances. Same result. He stood up to them when they tried to force him to sell our freight business. They arranged an accident with a wagon break on a steep mountain road." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said simply. Maggie shrugged, the gesture belying the pain evident in her eyes. "Been 5 years now. Built the business back up from nothing, only to have them burn it down when they decided freight would be more profitable under their control. That's their pattern. Identify something valuable, try to buy it, and if that doesn't work, take it by force." "And if we stop them here?" Rebecca asked. "What difference does it really make to their overall operation?" "More than you might think," Maggie replied. "Victor's been expanding aggressively, trying to establish a monopoly on all commerce moving through the territory. But he's stretched thin, committed resources to too many fronts at once. A significant defeat here, especially if it involves the death or capture of Jackson, could unravel their entire network." This perspective added a new dimension to their plans. They weren't just fighting for their immediate survival, or even for justice for past wrongs. They were potentially striking a blow that could free the entire territory from the Blackwood's criminal enterprise. The next day dawned with renewed purpose as everyone on the ranch worked to implement their defensive strategy. Trenches were dug, false barricades erected, hidden firing positions constructed, and tripwires set. Daniel supervised the placement of explosive charges at key points around the property, designed to channel attackers into kill zones or cut off their retreat. Swift Deer led hunting parties that brought back deer and prairie chickens, building up their food reserves in preparation for a potential siege. She also gathered medicinal plants, working with Mary to create poultices and tinctures that might be needed for treating wounds. Throughout it all, Rebecca continued to train the women, refining their shooting skills, teaching them to work as a coordinated unit rather than individual fighters. She was impressed by their progress, their city-bred reluctance to violence transformed into a focused determination to defend themselves and each other. "You've created something remarkable here," Eleanor commented as they took a brief rest, watching Clara lead Sarah and 2 others through a drilling exercise. "These women aren't just learning to fight, they're becoming a community." Rebecca followed her gaze, noting the easy camaraderie that had developed among the group, the way they anticipated each other's needs and compensated for each other's weaknesses. "It won't last," she said, more sharply than she'd intended. "Once the Blackwoods are dealt with, they'll all move on, return to their lives or build new ones." Eleanor studied her with thoughtful eyes. "Is that what you want? To return to your solitude after this is over?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. She had been so focused on preparation for the coming battle that she had avoided thinking too deeply about what would follow. The truth was that she no longer knew what she wanted beyond survival and justice. "What I want doesn't matter," she replied finally. "What matters is ensuring all of you have the freedom to choose your own paths." Eleanor's hand covered hers briefly, the touch warm and unexpectedly comforting. "Your wants matter too, Rebecca. You've given us back our lives. Perhaps it's time you considered what you want to do with your own." Before Rebecca could respond, the warning bell rang out from the northern watchtower where Swift Deer was stationed. Everyone froze, then moved with practiced efficiency to their assigned positions, weapons ready and expressions grim. Rebecca grabbed her rifle and sprinted to the main house, climbing to the second-floor window that gave her the best view of the northern approach. Through her spyglass, she could see a cloud of dust on the horizon, moving steadily closer. But as the riders came into focus, she realized this wasn't the attack they had been expecting. "Stand down," she called. "It's not the Blackwoods." The approaching group consisted of just 3 riders, moving openly across the plain without any attempt at concealment or tactical formation. As they drew closer, Rebecca could see that the lead rider was a woman, tall and straight-backed on a magnificent black horse. "Who is it?" Eleanor asked, joining Rebecca at the window. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "But whoever they are, they're not hiding their approach. Either they're not a threat, or they're very confident." She descended to the yard, rifle still in hand but pointed at the ground, and waited as the riders approached the main gate. Maggie and Thomas flanked her, with Eleanor and Clara positioned strategically nearby, all maintaining the appearance of casual welcome underscored by obvious readiness to respond to any threat. The woman who led the small party reined in her horse at the gate, studying the ranch and its defenders with intelligent eyes. She was perhaps 40, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Her companions, a man and a woman, deferred to her in subtle ways that marked her as their leader. "Rebecca Blackwood?" she called. Rebecca stepped forward. "Who's asking?" The woman dismounted with fluid grace, handing her reins to one of her companions. "My name is Judge Catherine Harrington. I've come from Helena on a matter of some urgency concerning Victor Blackwood and his operations." Judge Catherine Harrington stood in the main room of Willow Creek Ranch, her presence commanding attention without effort. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting her sharp features in golden light as she spread a collection of documents across the table. "For 2 years, I've been building a case against the Blackwoods," she explained, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to courtrooms. "Human trafficking, extortion, murder, bribery of public officials. The list of charges would fill pages. But witnesses have a troubling habit of disappearing or recanting their testimony when the Blackwoods are involved." Rebecca studied the judge with cautious assessment. "And you came here because 12 women who escaped their operation are currently on this ranch," Judge Harrington replied. "And because my sources tell me you're preparing for a confrontation that could either break their power in this territory or strengthen it immeasurably." Eleanor stepped forward, her gaze direct. "You want us to testify against them?" The judge nodded. "Your testimonies, combined with the evidence I've already gathered, could be enough to bring the entire operation down legally. No need for bloodshed, no risk to your lives." Clara laughed, the sound sharp and without humor. "You think the law can touch men like the Blackwoods? They own judges and marshals from Chicago to San Francisco." "Not all of us," Judge Harrington replied, her expression hardening. "Some of us still believe in justice, Ms. Clara Bennett. And I believe in justice, too, the kind delivered with a bullet to men who trade in women's lives." Rebecca held up a hand, forestalling further argument. "What exactly are you proposing, Judge Harrington?" The judge's plan was both elegant and pragmatic. She had arranged for federal marshals to be positioned secretly in Prairie Falls, waiting for her signal. With the women's testimonies secured and properly witnessed, the marshals would arrest Victor and Jackson Blackwood on federal charges of human trafficking across state lines. "The federal government has been looking for a way to curtail the Blackwood's operations for years," she explained. "Their activities threaten the stability and development of the entire region. What's been missing is concrete evidence from credible witnesses." Thomas, who had been quietly listening from his position by the door, spoke up. "And you think Victor will just surrender peacefully when your marshals show up with warrants?" Judge Harrington's smile was thin. "No, Mr. Calloway. I expect violence, which is why the marshal's office has authorized a significant force." 20 men, all experienced in handling dangerous fugitives. Rebecca exchanged glances with Maggie, seeing her own skepticism reflected in the freight operator's expression. 20 men against Victor's army? Maggie asked. Those aren't promising. Odds. They improve considerably when combined with the defensive force you've already assembled here, the judge pointed out. A coordinated effort between your people and the federal marshals could tip the balance decisively. The discussion that followed was intense, with opinions divided among the ranch's defenders. Clara and several others remained suspicious of any legal approach, arguing that the Blackwood's influence would eventually subvert even federal justice. Others, led by Eleanor, saw the potential for a more permanent solution that wouldn't require them to take on the moral burden of killing. Rebecca listened to all sides, weighing options and implications with the careful consideration of a commander responsible for both a tactical decision and the lives of those who would implement it. Finally, she turned to Judge Harrington. If we agree to this plan, I have conditions, she stated firmly. First, your marshals follow our tactical lead on our land. Second, all charges against Thomas are dropped in exchange for his testimony. Third, any women who wish to remain anonymous may do so. The judge considered these terms briefly before nodding. Agreed, with one addition. I want you personally involved in the operation. Ms. Blackwood, your knowledge of both the terrain and the Blackwoods makes you invaluable. Rebecca's expression revealed nothing of her inner thoughts as she extended her hand to seal the agreement. Then we have a deal. When can your marshals be in position? 3 days, Judge Harrington replied, clasping Rebecca's hand firmly. They're already moving toward Prairie Falls by different routes to avoid drawing attention. As the meeting concluded and the judge's party was shown to quarters for the night, Rebecca found herself alone with Eleanor in the war room, studying the maps that now included the marshals' planned approaches. Do you trust her? Eleanor asked quietly. Rebecca considered the question seriously. I trust her conviction. Whether that's enough remains to be seen. And if it's a trap? Eleanor pressed. If the Blackwoods have reached even into the federal justice system, then we'll handle it as we've planned all along, Rebecca replied, her hand moving unconsciously to the knife at her belt. We've prepared for every contingency, including betrayal. Eleanor studied her face, reading the complex emotions that Rebecca kept carefully controlled. This is personal for you, isn't it? Beyond what happened to your family, I mean. There's something more between you and the Blackwoods. Rebecca was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the outline of Willow Creek Ranch on the map. Finally she spoke, her voice low but steady. After James and Samuel died, I went after Victor legally. When that failed, I considered other options. I tracked him to Chicago, spent weeks learning his routines, his vulnerabilities. I got close enough to kill him. But you didn't, Eleanor observed. No, not because I couldn't, but because at the last moment, I realized it wouldn't bring them back. Nothing would. Rebecca's expression was distant with memory. So I came back here, built these walls around the ranch and around my heart, and tried to forget the world beyond my boundaries. Eleanor's hand covered hers on the map, the touch gentle but grounding. And now the world has found you anyway. It has a way of doing that, Rebecca acknowledged, surprised to find herself drawing comfort from the contact. The next day brought a flurry of activity as the ranch's defenses were adjusted to incorporate the marshals' planned involvement. Rebecca worked closely with Judge Harrington and her aides, reconciling their more conventional approach with the unorthodox tactics she had developed with the women. Throughout the day, Rebecca found herself watching Eleanor with growing awareness. The schoolteacher had a natural gift for organization, smoothly coordinating between different groups and ensuring that everyone understood their roles in the revised plan. She moved with a quiet confidence that had blossomed over the past weeks. Her initial fear transformed into capable determination. She's quite remarkable, Judge Harrington commented, following Rebecca's gaze to where Eleanor was demonstrating proper rifle technique to one of the younger women. "All of them are. You've done extraordinary work here." Rebecca nodded, uncomfortable with the praise but unable to deny the truth of it. "They did the work themselves. I just showed them the way. Sometimes that's the most important thing, showing someone what they're capable of becoming." The judge studied Rebecca with perceptive eyes. "What will you do when this is over, Miss Blackwood? Return to your solitude?" The question echoed Eleanor's from the day before, striking a chord that resonated uncomfortably in Rebecca's chest. For so long, her only purpose had been survival and the nurturing of a quiet rage against those who had taken everything from her. Now faced with the possibility of that rage being satisfied, she found herself uncertain about what might fill the void it would leave. "I haven't thought that far ahead," she replied, more sharply than she'd intended. Judge Harrington smiled slightly. "Perhaps you should. The women you've trained will need guidance even after the Blackwoods are dealt with. New lives to build, skills to develop, a community to create. They're more than capable of managing." "Without me," Rebecca countered. "Capable, yes. But there's a difference between what we can do alone and what we can achieve together." The judge gestured toward the busy yard where the women were working in coordinated teams, their movements showing the results of weeks of training and growing trust. "You've built something valuable here, not just a defensive force, but the beginnings of a community. That's rare in these territories and worth preserving." Before Rebecca could respond, Swift Deer approached at a run, her normally composed expression tense with urgency. "Riders approaching from the south," she reported. "Not the judge's marshals. These move like men looking for a fight." Rebecca immediately shifted into command mode, all personal considerations set aside. "How many?" "At least 15, maybe more hidden by the dust." "Sound the alarm," Rebecca ordered. "Everyone to defensive positions. Juge, you and your people should take cover in the main house." As the warning bell rang out across the ranch, the women moved with practiced efficiency to their assigned positions. Clara and her team manned the concealed rifle pits that overlooked the southern approach. Mary and 2 others took positions in the reinforced barn loft that provided the best elevated firing platform. Eleanor joined Rebecca on the porch of the main house, both armed and ready. Through her spyglass, Rebecca studied the approaching riders. "It's Jackson," she confirmed, recognizing the younger Blackwood brother at the head of the column. "Looks like he's brought reinforcements since our last encounter. Not the full force Thomas warned us about, though," Eleanor observed. "Where's Victor?" "That's what concerns me," Rebecca replied. "This could be a diversion." She dispatched Swift Deer to check the northern perimeter, then positioned additional lookouts to watch for approaches from other directions. The defensive plan they had developed anticipated attacks from multiple angles, but success would depend on having adequate warning. Jackson Blackwood halted his men just beyond effective rifle range, then rode forward alone, a white handkerchief tied to his rifle barrel in the universal signal for parley. Rebecca motioned for everyone to hold their fire, but maintain readiness. "Miss Blackwood," Jackson called, his voice carrying clearly across the open ground. "I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot during our last meeting. I've come to offer terms." Rebecca stepped to the edge of the porch, her rifle held casually but ready. "Speak your piece, Jackson. But keep in mind how our last negotiation ended." Jackson's smile was cold and calculated. "My brother is a businessman above all else. He recognizes that the cost of recovering these particular women may exceed their value. He's prepared to write them off as a business loss with certain conditions." "I'm listening," Rebecca replied, her tone making it clear she was humoring him rather than seriously considering any offer. "First, Thomas Calloway is returned to us for proper justice. His theft cost my brother a significant investment. Second, you sign over the mineral rights to your ranch. Our surveyors have identified promising deposits on your northern boundary. Third, you provide written testimony that the women came here willingly, with no coercion involved in their transport west. Rebecca's laugh was genuine in its incredulity. Those aren't terms, Jackson. That's a wish list from a man who's afraid he's losing control. Jackson's facade of civility slipped, revealing the anger beneath. You have no idea what you're dealing with, woman. My brother's organization stretches across half the country. He has judges in his pocket, politicians on his payroll, and enough men at his disposal to wipe this pathetic ranch off the map. And yet here you are, offering terms instead of simply taking what you want, Rebecca observed. That suggests your brother isn't quite as confident as you claim. Jackson's face flushed with anger. This is your last chance, Blackwood. Accept the terms or face the consequences. Rebecca's expression hardened, all pretense of negotiation vanishing. Here are my terms, Jackson. You and your brother leave this territory permanently. You release any other women being held against their will in your establishments. You make restitution to the families of those who've died from your tainted medicines and supplies. Do that, and perhaps I'll let you leave here alive. Jackson stared at her for a long moment, then spat on the ground. You've sealed your fate. He turned his horse sharply and galloped back to his waiting men. Prepare yourselves, Rebecca called to the defenders. They'll attack soon. But to everyone's surprise, Jackson and his men wheeled their horses and rode away, heading south, at a steady pace that suggested retreat rather than tactical withdrawal. What just happened? Eleanor asked, confusion evident in her voice. Rebecca's expression was grim as realization dawned. It was a distraction, Swift Deer, she called urgently. The Lakota woman appeared from behind the barn, running at full speed. The North Ridge, she reported breathlessly. Men moving into position, at least 20, maybe more. And now Jackson's force will circle around to join them, Rebecca concluded. They're surrounding us, planning to attack from multiple directions at once. The reality of their situation settled over the group with chilling clarity. They had prepared for an attack, but not for a coordinated assault from superior numbers on multiple fronts. Even with Judge Harrington's marshals, they would be significantly outnumbered. We need to consolidate our defenses, Maggie suggested. Abandon the outer positions and concentrate our forces around the main buildings. Rebecca shook her head. That's what they want, to pin us down in a central location where they can overwhelm us with superior numbers. No, we stick with the original plan, but accelerate the timetable. She turned to Judge Harrington. How quickly can you get word to your marshals? I sent one of my people as soon as we spotted Jackson approaching, the judge replied. If they ride hard, they could be here by dawn. We need to hold until then, Rebecca stated, her mind already calculating adjustments to their defensive strategy. Thomas, take Daniel and reinforce the explosives at the northern approach. Make sure they're rigged for remote detonation. Clara, I want your best shots on the ridge overlooking the eastern trail. If Victor tries to bring in men from that direction, make them pay for every foot of ground. As everyone moved to implement the revised defensive plan, Eleanor stayed at Rebecca's side. What aren't you saying? She asked quietly, reading the concern behind Rebecca's composed exterior. Rebecca hesitated, then decided that Eleanor deserved the truth. The timing is wrong. Victor's moving too soon, before we expected him. Either he knows about the marshals, or there's another factor we haven't considered, Eleanor finished for her. Something that's forcing his hand, Rebecca nodded. We need to find out what it is before it's too late. The opportunity came sooner than expected. As darkness fell over Willow Creek Ranch, Swift Deer reported a lone rider approaching from the east, not on the main trail, but following a nearly invisible game path that wound through a stand of cottonwoods. It could be a scout for Victor's main force, Thomas suggested as they observed the rider's careful progress. Or it could be someone with information, Rebecca countered. Either way, I want them alive and talking. She turned to Mary, whose skill with a rifle had proven exceptional. Can you disable the rider without killing them? Mary nodded confidently. At that range, I can put a bullet through the saddle horn if you want. Just make sure they can. Still talk afterward, Rebecca instructed. Clara, take Sarah and circle around behind. If the rider tries to escape back the way they came, cut them off. The plan worked with precision. Mary's shot took the rider's horse in the flank, a painful but non-lethal wound that sent the animal rearing in panic and throwing its rider to the ground. Before the stunned figure could regain their feet, Clara and Sarah had emerged from the trees, weapons trained on the intruder. To everyone's surprise, the captive turned out to be a woman in her 30s, dressed in the practical clothes of a frontier wife, but with the alert eyes and watchful demeanor of someone accustomed to danger. My name is Lavra Carson, she announced without preamble when brought before Rebecca. My husband works for Victor Blackwood as a bookkeeper. I've come to warn you. Rebecca studied her with cautious assessment. Warn us about what? Lavra glanced nervously at the others gathered in the ranch house kitchen before focusing on Rebecca. Victor knows about the federal marshals. He has a spy in Judge Harrington's office who intercepted the communication about their deployment. He's moving his entire operation tonight, destroying records, relocating assets, eliminating potential witnesses. By tomorrow, there will be nothing left for the marshals to find. And the attack on our ranch? Eleanor asked. A final cleanup operation, Lavra confirmed. He can't afford to leave any of you alive to testify. The assault is planned for just before dawn, simultaneous attacks from 3 directions, with enough men to overwhelm your defenses before the marshals can arrive. Rebecca exchanged glances with Judge Harrington, whose expression had darkened. With each word, "Why are you telling us this?" the judge demanded. "Why betray your husband's employer?" Laura's laugh held no humor, only bitterness. Because my sister was one of his assets. She died in one of his houses in Denver last year. David doesn't know I know. He believes the story about her moving to California to get married. I've been looking for a way to bring Victor down ever since. Rebecca nodded slowly, making her decision. Judge, we need to get word to your marshals immediately. The timetable has changed. It's too late, Lavra interjected. Victor has men watching all the approaches to Prairie Falls. Any messenger would be intercepted before they could reach the marshals. Then we need to change the battlefield, Rebecca stated, her mind already formulating a new strategy. Instead of waiting for them to attack us here, we take the fight to them. The plan that emerged over the next hour was audacious in its simplicity. Rather than defending the ranch against overwhelming numbers, they would split their forces. A small group would remain behind to maintain the appearance of full defensive readiness, while the main force would slip away under cover of darkness to intercept Victor's operation at its most vulnerable point during the evacuation of his headquarters in Prairie Falls. It's risky, Thomas warned. If Victor has as many men as Lavra suggests, we'll still be outnumbered. But we'll have surprise on our side, Rebecca countered. And we'll be hitting them when they're focused. Unmoving, not fighting. Their attention will be divided, their forces scattered across multiple locations. Eleanor studied the hastily drawn map of Prairie Falls, her finger tracing the location of Victor's operational headquarters. This could work, she said thoughtfully. Especially if we can coordinate with the marshals once we're in position. Judge Harrington nodded in agreement. The original plan called for them to surround the building at dawn. If we can get there first, establish positions, and then signal them when they arrive, we catch Victor's organization in a vice, Rebecca finished. Squeezed between our forces and the federal marshals. The logistics were complex but manageable. Swift Deer knew hidden trails that could get them to the outskirts of Prairie Falls undetected. Daniel's expertise with explosives would be crucial for creating diversions at key moments. Clara and her best shots would take elevated positions to provide covering fire. And Rebecca, Eleanor, and Judge Harrington would lead the main assault force directly to Victor's headquarters. As preparations were made and final instructions given, Rebecca found a moment alone with Eleanor in the tack room, where they were checking weapons and ammunition. "You don't have to be on the front line of this," Rebecca said quietly. "Your testimony against the Blackwoods is too valuable to risk." Eleanor looked up from the revolver she was loading, her expression resolute. "We all risk everything, or none of us are truly free. I didn't come this far to watch from safety while others fight my battles." Rebecca studied her face in the lamplight, seeing the transformation that had occurred since the frightened teacher had first arrived at Willow Creek Ranch. Eleanor had discovered a core of steel within herself, a strength that had always been there but needed circumstance to reveal it. "When this is over," Rebecca began, then hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain of her words. Eleanor waited, her gaze steady and encouraging. "When this is over," Rebecca tried again, "I'd like you to consider staying. Not just you, any of the women who want to. There's room enough at Willow Creek for a community, not just a solitary woman with too many ghosts." Eleanor's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I was hoping you'd say that. This place, what we've built here, it's worth preserving and expanding." The moment was interrupted by Maggie's arrival, her expression grave. "Time to move out," she announced. "Swift Deer reports Victor's men are already positioning themselves for the dawn attack." As they mounted up and prepared to ride, Rebecca looked back at Willow Creek Ranch, the place that had been her refuge and prison. For 7 years. Whether she returned victorious or not at all, she knew the solitary existence she had built there was over. Something new was taking its place, something with room for connection, purpose, and perhaps even joy. The night embraced them as they rode silently toward Prairie Falls, 20 determined women and their allies moving like shadows across the prairie. They carried with them not just weapons and determination, but a vision of a future where they defined their own lives, built their own community, and stood as equals in a land that had tried to reduce them to commodities. Victor Blackwood's reckoning was coming with the dawn, and it wore the faces of the women he had thought to control. Prairie Falls emerged from the pre-dawn darkness like a ship materializing through fog. First the tall silhouette of the church steeple, then the scattered buildings of the main street, and finally the sprawling structure that served as Victor Blackwood's territorial headquarters. Rebecca studied the town from their vantage point on a ridge overlooking the eastern approach, noting the unusual activity for such an early hour. "Lavra was right," she murmured to Eleanor, who lay beside her in the tall grass. "They're evacuating. Look at the wagons being loaded behind the main building." Through her spyglass, Eleanor observed men carrying crates and document boxes from the headquarters to waiting wagons. "They're destroying evidence," she confirmed. "And there, those covered wagons on the north side. Those could be women being moved." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Swift Deer," she called softly to the Lakota woman who had guided them through the darkness. "Take Mary and Sarah, circle around to those wagons. If there are women inside, free them and get them to safety. Wait for my signal before moving in." Swift Deer nodded and melted away into the shadows with the 2 younger women, their movements silent as hunting cats. Rebecca turned to the rest of her force, gathered in small groups behind the ridgeline. "Remember the plan," she instructed. "Clara, take your sharpshooters to the church tower. You'll have the best view of the entire operation from there. Daniel, set your charges at the locations we discussed. The stable first, then the rear exit of the headquarters. Judge Harrington, your position is with Maggie at the marshal's office. When your people arrive, coordinate their movements with ours." As the groups dispersed to their assigned positions, Rebecca found herself alone with Eleanor and Thomas. "This is where it gets complicated," she admitted. "We need to find Victor before he can escape in the confusion." Thomas checked his weapons one final time. According to Lovra, his private office is on the second floor, rear corner of the building. "If he's overseeing the evacuation personally, that's where he'll be." "Then that's where we're headed," Rebecca declared, her expression resolute. "But first, we create a diversion that will split their attention and forces." The diversion came in the form of Daniel's first explosive charge, strategically placed in the stable where many of Victor's men had quartered their horses. The explosion wasn't large enough to kill. Rebecca had been explicit about minimizing casualties among those who were simply following orders, but it created sufficient chaos to draw attention and manpower away from the headquarters building. As shouts and running figures filled the street, Rebecca led Eleanor and Thomas through the shadows toward their primary target. They moved with the coordinated precision of people who had trained together for weeks, covering each other's advances and communicating with hand signals perfected during countless practice sessions. The rear entrance to the headquarters was guarded by two men, both looking nervously toward the burning stable. They never saw the threat approaching from the shadows behind them. Rebecca and Thomas took them down simultaneously, quick blows to the base of the skull that rendered them unconscious without raising an alarm. Inside, the building was in organized chaos, with men rushing to remove documents and valuables before dawn brought the expected arrival of the federal marshals. Rebecca led her small team up a back staircase, avoiding the main areas where activity was concentrated. The second floor was quieter, with only occasional figures hurrying past with arms full of papers or strongboxes. Victor's office was identified by its imposing oak door at the end of the hallway, currently guarded by a single man whose alert posture and professional demeanor marked him as more than a simple hired gun. Rebecca signaled for Thomas to create a distraction, and he obliged by staging a loud, stumbling entrance at the opposite end of the hall. As the guard's attention was diverted momentarily, Rebecca moved with lethal efficiency, disarming him before he could raise an alarm and rendering him unconscious with a precise strike. Eleanor secured his weapons and tied his hands, her movements showing the results of weeks of training. "Ready?" Rebecca asked, her hand on the office door. Eleanor and Thomas nodded, weapons drawn and expressions determined. With a sudden motion, Rebecca flung the door open and entered in a combat crouch, her rifle sweeping the room for threats. Victor Blackwood stood behind a massive desk, in the process of emptying a wall safe into a leather satchel. He turned at their entrance, his expression registering shock before smoothing into calculating assessment. He was older than his brother Jackson, with silver threading his dark hair and lines of authority etched into his face. His eyes were cold and evaluating, revealing nothing of his thoughts as he straightened to his full height. "Rebecca Blackwood," he said, his voice cultured and controlled. "We meet at last. I've heard much about the nurse who became a frontier vigilante." Rebecca kept her rifle trained on his chest. "And I've learned everything I need to know about the war profiteer, who became a human trafficker. Your operation ends today, Victor." His smile never reached his eyes. "I admire your determination, but you're too late. My most valuable assets have already been moved. My records are either destroyed or en route to secure locations, and my brother is currently leading a force to your ranch that will eliminate any remaining witnesses." "You mean the ranch that's been evacuated except for a skeleton crew?" Eleanor interjected, her voice steady despite the tension of the moment. "The one where your brother will find himself caught between our defenses and the federal marshals currently riding from the north?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Victor's face. "You're bluffing. The marshals aren't due until dawn." "Plans change," Rebecca replied. "Just as your carefully constructed empire is about to change into a prison cell." Victor's hand moved slightly toward his desk drawer, a motion so subtle it would have been missed by less observant opponents. Rebecca's shot splintered the wood inches from his fingers, freezing him in place. "The next one goes through your hand," she warned. "Step away from the desk." For a tense moment, it seemed Victor might defy her. Then, with deliberate slowness, he raised his hands and moved to the center of the room. "You've won a skirmish, not the war," he stated coldly. "My organization extends far beyond this territory. Even if you succeed here, others will continue the work." "Perhaps," Thomas acknowledged, securing Victor's hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. "But you won't be part of it. The federal charges alone will keep you imprisoned for decades if you're not hanged first." A commotion from the street below drew their attention. Through the office window, they could see the first contingent of federal marshals riding into town, their badges catching the light of the burning stable. At the same time, Clara's sharpshooters opened fire from the church tower, picking off armed men attempting to flee with documentation or valuables. "Right on schedule," Eleanor observed with satisfaction. "Judge Harrington coordinates well." Rebecca kept her attention focused on Victor, whose composed exterior had begun to show cracks as he watched his operation crumbling around him. "You have a choice to make," she told him. "Cooperate with the federal investigation, provide information on your entire network, and you might avoid the gallows. Resist, and I'll personally testify about every crime I know you've committed, starting with the tainted medicines that killed my son." Victor's eyes narrowed at the mention of her personal connection. That transaction was merely business, nothing personal. Substitute ingredients reduced costs and increased profits. The fact that some patients reacted poorly was unfortunate, but statistically inevitable. The casual dismissal of her son's death struck Rebecca like a physical blow, momentarily stealing her breath. In that instant, all the rage she had carried for 7 years crystallized into a single, clarifying understanding. Victor Blackwood was not a monster or a demon, just a man who had chosen profit over humanity so many times that he no longer recognized the difference. "Take him downstairs," she instructed Thomas, her voice steady despite the emotion churning within her. "Judge Harrington will want to secure him personally." As Thomas led Victor from the room, Eleanor moved to Rebecca's side. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. Rebecca took a deep breath, feeling something shift within her, not the lifting of a burden, but its transformation into something else entirely. "I thought I needed him dead to find peace," she admitted. "But seeing him reduced to this, a cornered criminal facing justice, it's enough. More than enough." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by the sound of gunfire erupting with new intensity from the street below. Rebecca moved to the window and saw Jackson Blackwood and a contingent of his men charging into town from the western approach, guns blazing as they headed directly for the headquarters building. He must have realized the ranch was a decoy, Eleanor surmised, checking her weapon. "He's coming to rescue his brother." Rebecca's tactical mind immediately assessed the situation. "Thomas is taking Victor down the main stairs. They'll be exposed. We need to intercept and provide cover." They raced from the office and down the hallway, reaching the main staircase just as Thomas and his prisoner emerged onto the landing. Below, the front doors burst open, admitting Jackson and 3 armed men who immediately opened fire on the marshals pursuing them. "Get down!" Rebecca shouted, pushing Thomas and Victor to the floor as bullets splintered the banister beside them. She and Eleanor returned fire from their protected position, forcing Jackson's men to seek cover behind overturned furniture in the main hall. "Rebecca Blackwood," Jackson called, recognizing her. "Release my brother, and I'll let you leave. Alive. Fight, and none of you will see another sunrise." "Your organization is finished, Jackson," Rebecca replied, strategically placing shots to keep him pinned down. "Federal marshals have the building surrounded. Your only option is surrender." Jackson's response was a barrage of gunfire that forced Rebecca and Eleanor to duck behind the solid wood of the staircase balustrade. In the momentary lull that followed, Victor made his move. driving his shoulder into Thomas's midsection and breaking free of his grasp. Before Rebecca could react, Victor had rolled down the stairs toward his brother's position. "Cover me!" Jackson shouted to his men, who laid down suppressing fire as he dragged his brother to safety behind an overturned desk. The situation had deteriorated from controlled apprehension to chaotic firefight in seconds. Rebecca assessed their options with rapid calculation. They were pinned down at the top of the stairs, with limited ammunition and no clear route of escape. The marshals outside were engaged with other elements of Victor's force and couldn't immediately provide assistance. "We need to change the equation," she murmured, then raised her voice to call to Daniel, who she knew had entered the building from the rear. "Second charge, now." Seconds later, an explosion rocked the back of the building, sending vibrations through the floor and creating a massive distraction. In the moment of confusion, Rebecca signaled to Eleanor and Thomas, "Now, down the right side, behind the column cover." They moved as one, descending the stairs in a controlled rush while firing precisely to keep the Blackwoods and their men suppressed. They reached the relative safety of a stone column just as the first marshals breached the front entrance, creating a crossfire that trapped the Blackwoods between opposing forces. "It's over, Victor." Judge Harrington's voice rang out as she entered behind her marshals. "Your network has been exposed, your operation dismantled. Surrender now, and I'll guarantee your safety to stand trial." The tension in the room built to an unbearable pitch as silence fell, broken only by the distant sounds of conflict elsewhere in town. Then, unexpectedly, Victor's voice emerged from behind the barricade. "She's right, Jackson. It's finished. There's nothing to be gained by dying here." Jackson's response was immediate and violent. "Coward, we can still escape. We have men in 3 states, resources hidden where they'll never find them." "It's over," Victor repeated, his tone resigned. "I'm surrendering." To everyone's surprise, he stood slowly, hands raised, and walked toward the marshals. Jackson's howl of rage preceded his emergence from cover, gun raised not toward the marshals or Rebecca, but toward his brother's back. "Traitor!" he screamed, finger tightening on the trigger. Rebecca's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and spoiling his aim. His bullet went wide, embedding itself in the ceiling as he stumbled. Before he could recover, marshals swarmed him, disarming and restraining him despite his struggles and curses. In the aftermath, as the Blackwood brothers were secured and the headquarters building brought fully under marshal control, Rebecca found herself standing in the street, watching as the dawn light illuminated a transformed Prairie Falls. Federal agents moved purposefully between buildings, securing evidence and apprehending remaining members of the Blackwood organization. Swift Deer and her team had successfully freed 16 women from the transport wagons, many now receiving medical attention from Mary and Judge Harrington's physician. "We did it," Eleanor said softly, coming to stand beside her. "Actually, truly did it." Rebecca nodded, feeling strangely hollow despite their victory. She had carried her quest for justice for so long that its fulfillment left an emptiness she hadn't anticipated. Victor will face federal charges. The evidence we've secured, combined with the testimonies of the women, ensures he won't see freedom again. "And what about us?" Eleanor asked, her question encompassing far more than just the two of them. "What happens to all of us now?" Rebecca turned to look at the women who had transformed under her guidance from victims to warriors. Clara was organizing a perimeter guard with professional efficiency. Mary moved among the injured, her medical skills bringing comfort and healing. Sarah and the others were helping secure prisoners and evidence, working alongside the federal marshals as equals rather than subordinates. "They can go anywhere, be anything," Rebecca replied. "That's what we fought for, the freedom to choose their own paths." Eleanor studied her face with perceptive eyes. "And what will you choose, Rebecca? Will you return to your solitude at Willow Creek Ranch?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had dared articulate fully during the preparation for battle. Rebecca considered her answer carefully, looking beyond Eleanor to where the first rays of sun illuminated the distant hills. "I don't think I can go back to what I was," she admitted. "These past weeks have reminded me of who I used to be, someone who built things rather than just survived them. Someone who found purpose in connection rather than isolation." Eleanor's smile was like sunrise after a long night. Then perhaps Willow Creek could become something new, not just a refuge, but a foundation. The idea took shape between them, growing from tentative suggestion to compelling vision as they discussed it. Willow Creek Ranch had the land, the resources, and now the skilled women to become something unprecedented in the territory, a community run by and for women who sought independence and purpose on their own terms. As the federal operation wound down and preparations were made to transport the Blackwood brothers to Helena for trial, Judge Harrington approached Rebecca and Eleanor with an unexpected proposal. "The territorial governor has taken a special interest in this case," she informed them. "The Blackwood's corruption extended into local government throughout the region. He's looking for people with both integrity and demonstrated capability to help restore order and proper administration." Rebecca eyed her suspiciously. "What exactly are you suggesting, Judge?" "The governor is prepared to appoint you as the new territorial marshal for this district. Ms. Blackwood, your actions here have proven your commitment to justice and your ability to organize effective operations against significant opposition." The offer was so unexpected that Rebecca found herself momentarily speechless. Eleanor touched her arm gently. "It would give you official authority to continue the work you've started," she pointed out, "to ensure that nothing like the Blackwoods operation can take root here again." Rebecca considered the possibility, weighing it against her emerging vision for Willow Creek. "I can't abandon the ranch," she said finally. "It's not just my home anymore. It belongs to all of the women who fought for it." "The position doesn't require you to relocate to Helena," Judge Harrington clarified. "You would establish your office wherever you deemed most effective, and—" She hesitated, her expression softening slightly. "There's nothing preventing a marshal from developing community initiatives alongside her official duties." The potential of this arrangement unfolded in Rebecca's mind. Official authority to protect what they were building, combined with the freedom to shape Willow Creek into the community they envisioned. She looked to Eleanor, whose expression reflected the same recognition of possibility. "I'll consider it," Rebecca told the judge. "But first, we need to return to the ranch. There's much to be done there." The ride back to Willow Creek was marked by a different quality of tension than their journey to Prairie Falls. Not the taut anticipation of battle, but the expectant energy of creation. The women talked among themselves, ideas and possibilities, flowing freely now that the shadow of the Blackwoods no longer hung over them. Clara spoke of establishing a training program for women who wanted to learn self-defense and shooting. Mary discussed creating a proper infirmary to serve both the ranch and surrounding homesteads. Sarah, her natural shyness giving way to growing confidence, proposed a system for breeding and training horses that could become a sustainable source of income. As they crested the final ridge and Willow Creek Ranch came into view, Rebecca reined in her horse, taking a moment to observe the place that had been her solitary refuge for 7 years. The defensive barricades and rifle pits that marked its transformation into a fortress would soon be repurposed into the foundations of something entirely different, a community built on principles of self-reliance, mutual support, and shared purpose. "It's going to be a lot of work," she commented to Eleanor, who had stopped beside her. Eleanor's smile held both warmth and determination. "The best things always are." 3 months later, Willow Creek Ranch had undergone a transformation, as profound as that of the women who now called it home. New buildings had risen alongside the original structures, A schoolhouse where Eleanor taught both children from neighboring homesteads and adults eager to improve their education. A trading post that served as both store and social center. An infirmary under Mary's capable direction. And additional housing for the growing community. Rebecca had accepted the marshal's position, establishing her office in a small building adjacent to the main house. Her jurisdiction covered a significant portion of the territory, but she organized her duties to allow her to remain based at Willow Creek, with deputies stationed in key locations throughout the region. The community had grown beyond the original 12 women. Word had spread of a place where women could find not just safety, but purpose and belonging. They came from various backgrounds, widows seeking a fresh start, young women fleeing restrictive family situations, former Harvey girls looking for more independence, even a female doctor from Chicago who had grown tired of fighting for professional respect in the city. Each brought unique skills and perspectives, enriching the community in unexpected ways. Some stayed permanently, while others came to learn what they needed before moving on to establish their own ventures elsewhere. All found at Willow Creek a model of female independence and cooperation unlike anything existing elsewhere in the territory. On a clear autumn evening, as the setting sun painted the prairie in gold and amber, Rebecca stood on the porch of the main house, watching the activity that filled the ranch yard. Women moved purposefully between buildings, carrying tools, goods, and ideas with equal facility. Children played near the new schoolhouse, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. In the distance, a wagon approached, bringing new arrivals or returning residents. Eleanor joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts, Marshal Blackwood," she said, offering one of the cups. Rebecca accepted it with a smile. That came more easily these days. "I was thinking about how different this place is from what it was a year ago. How different I am. For the better, I hope?" Eleanor's question carried a personal note beneath its casual delivery. "Definitely. For the better," Rebecca confirmed, her free hand finding Eleanor's in a gesture that had become familiar and cherished. Their relationship had deepened gradually as they worked side by side to build the community, moving from wary allies to trusted friends to something more intimate and profound. From the direction of the new bunkhouse came the sound of Clara's voice, leading the evening target practice that had become a community tradition. Near the barn, Swift Deer was demonstrating tracking techniques to a group of attentive learners. Sarah rode by on a magnificent black stallion, the pride of her developing horse breeding program. "You know what amazes me most," Rebecca said after a comfortable silence. "Not just that we survived the Blackwoods, but that we've created something that would have been impossible for any of us individually. Something that will outlast all of us." Eleanor nodded, understanding the depth behind the observation. "That's the real victory, not just overcoming evil, but building good in its place. Creating a legacy that changes lives beyond our own." As twilight deepened toward night, lamps were lit throughout the community, their warm glow pushing back the darkness like beacons of civilization in the wilderness. But unlike the cities back east, the light here represented a different kind of progress, one built on cooperation rather than competition, on mutual support rather than exploitation. "We should get ready for the town meeting," Eleanor reminded her. "Everyone will be gathering in the schoolhouse soon." Rebecca nodded, but lingered a moment longer on the porch, savoring the sight of what they had built together. 7 years ago, she had come to this place broken by loss and seeking only isolation. Now she stood at the heart of a thriving community, surrounded by women who had transformed themselves from victims to creators. The 12 beautiful girls who had escaped to her land had become something far more significant, the founders of a new way of living that would influence the territory for generations to come. And Rebecca herself had found something she had thought forever lost, not just purpose, but joy, connection, and a future worth building. As she and Eleanor walked together toward the schoolhouse, where the community would gather to make decisions that shaped their collective future. Rebecca reflected that the most important journeys often begin with the most unexpected encounters. What had started as a desperate flight from bondage had blossomed into a bold experiment in freedom, proving that even in the harshest frontier, determined women could create something revolutionary, a place where they defined their own worth, wrote their own stories, and built their own dreams into reality. The girl who had been bought for $1 had become priceless, and the ranch that had sheltered a lonely woman had become a beacon of hope for countless others seeking to chart their own course through the unforgiving but opportunity-rich landscape of the American West. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.